and welcome back to the channel. I'm Muriel, and in this video I will be doing my reading wrap-up for the month of March. Last month I read a total of 8 books, evenly split between fiction and non-fiction this time. Starting with the non-fiction, I first read Botanical Curses and Poisons, The Shadow Lives of Plants, written or published, I'm not entirely sure about this actually, Inkwright. Like the relatively recently read Witch's Forest, written by Sandra Lawrence, this is essentially a book about botany, or mycology, and ethnobotany, or ethnomycology. This one, however, also specifically focuses on poisonous plants, and plants that have traditionally been associated with gloomy and or spooky things like death, illness, heartbreak, witchcraft, demons, ghosts, the devil, etc. You get the gist. The book's first section features an introduction and what I'll call general information chapters. The second presents a wide array of plant and some fungal species in alphabetical order. And it also features simple but I think very nice line drawing illustrations of said plant or fungal species. I really enjoyed this publication. I found it pretty comprehensive in terms of the information that was given for each species or genus, as the case might have been, and in terms of the very scope of species or genuses that were present in it. It was just really interesting and pleasant to read. So I gave it a solid 8 out of 10, and would thus very confidently, yes, recommend it to botanical and fungal, to a lesser extent folklore enthusiasts. Especially, once again, if they specifically enjoy the spookier side of said folklore. After that, I read the beautiful Welsh monsters and mythical beasts, written and illustrated by C.C.J. Ellis. This was a, like I said, beautiful and just, yes, lovely art and reference book about some of the folklore, mythology, etc. of Welsh fantastical creatures. I loved the author's art style, is an example of it, and the fact they featured all of the creatures' original Welsh names, and yes, don't worry, a pronunciation guide is provided at the beginning of the book. I also enjoyed recognizing some of them from my having read the Mabinogion a few years ago, actually. Now, whilst I thoroughly enjoyed this book, oh yes, it was a feast for the eyes, and this mythology nerd with a specific love for mythological creatures, and happily gave it an 8.5 to very soft 9 out of 10 rating. I do think more textual information could have been provided for each creature, beast, spirit, etc., and that the book could have been a little longer. But I'm also a greedy bitch when it comes to this stuff, because mythology nerd, so make of that what you will. After that delightful read, I forced myself through Period, the real story of menstruation, written by Clancy, a purportedly academic treatise about our current understanding of the biological phenomenon of menstruation and its cultural ramifications in our species. And as an FYI, human beings are just one of very few mammalian species who actually menstruate. Anyway, and unfortunately, it is the worst non-fiction book I've read since Entangled Life back in 2021. I originally DNF'd this one! I read its introduction, noped out real hard, but then, because I'm an idiot, I misguidedly opted to give this book a second chance. Big mistake on my part, because the tonal and, let's say, framing issue I encountered in the intro very much continued throughout the rest of the text. It was way too American-centric, for one thing, and way too concerned with virtue signaling and self-flagellation for the crime of being written by a non-dysphoric female human of European descent, for another. Whinging woke nonsense, basically. Thing is, and to paraphrase somewhat my boyfriend, the entirety of fucking Western medicine has colonialist, imperialist, classist, what have you, skeletons in its closet, so can we please move the fuck on in a book purportedly about the phenomenon of menstruation itself, or any, biological phenomenon? Like, seriously, the book's conclusion all but argues women seeking information about their own frickin' bodies should first receive a class on the eugenic past of gynecology to create a better, more inclusive future. I guess. How about no? Just give me the frickin' science, or GTFO. Please and thank you. Unfortunately, but unsurprisingly at this point, there was very little actual frickin' science in this thing, medical or otherwise. The author tried to tackle way too many research angles. Biology, anthropology, sociology, public health policy, social justice, etc. over the span of a relatively short text, and failed to properly delve into any of them as a result. I learned next to nothing of note in this book, with, say, regards to the perception of menstruation in other cultures, or the actual biology of menstruation, in relation to things like stress, for instance. It was the very incarnation of spread too thin superficiality. And this, tying back to my first point, is also because the author wasted way too many pages writing what essentially amounted to a political op-ed, pamphlet, manifesto, what have you, instead of an actual pop science book, which is what I wanted. The simple fact is, at the end of the day, this book suffered from its obsession with so-called identity politics. And I always feel so freaking weird with this stuff, because I consider myself, quite vocally, a feminist, anti-racist, unspecifiedly leftist, and an environmentalist. But this stuff, it just falls into the most off-putting kind of unnuanced, untethered, black and white thinking. I'm just like, blech. What a waste of my time. Seriously though, Princeton University Press, what the fuck were you smoking? Oh, that's right, you just wanted that woke, title bait fat dollar fiction publishing makes on books they falsely advertise as feminist. That, sadly, checks out. Win one for capitalism there, am I right? But sad also. So yeah, this book was terrible. It was terrible. Just a wishy-washy virtue signally nothing burger. I love that expression. I gave a weak ass 3 out of 10 rating. Read Caroline Criado Perez's Invisible Women for an infinitely better book about what I think this one was trying to go for, and, well, something else to learn about the actual science of menstruation, I guess. Next time, I swear to the freaking gods, I am sticking to my decision to DNF, because god damn. After that abject train wreck, I blessedly finished the month with something infinitely more palatable. Space Crone, written by none other than Ursula Le Guin. This was my very first foray into Le Guin's nonfiction writing, and I found this to be a very enjoyable, thoughtful, articulate, and spirited collection of essays and bits of fiction, some of which I'd already read and thus skipped here, speeches, etc. Thematically, Space Crone definitely qualifies as a broadly, but legitimately not clickbaitily, feminist collection. Its contents principally focus on the experience of motherhood, old age, or menopause, or should I say cronehood? Sexist discrimination in literature and the arts more generally, and the, what I'll call, art craft of writing itself, more specifically as a woman in a dichotomized, androcratic world. Now, I didn't always personally agree with Le Guin's analysis, discourse, whatever you want to call it, but I didn't mind that in the slightest because A, you don't always need to agree 100% on everything with someone whose, thinking and creative output you appreciate, and B, because on the whole, it was a delight to simply engage with at least parts of her mind, her thinking, and of course writing like this. So I gave Space Crone a very strong 7.5 out of 10 rating, and will most definitely read more of Le Guin's nonfiction in the future. Moving on to the fiction now, and Joe Abercrombie's first law trilogy, which I spent most of March mostly listening to. You know how sometimes you can hate a book and still understand why people like it? Well, here I'm still 3 or 4 weeks later really struggling to understand why people don't like, that's fine, but love this trilogy so bloody much. This is a series I didn't hate, but really do not get the hype for at all. Now, I just may come back to discussing the series in relation to other works of fantasy as well in the near future. We'll see. So I'll simply give a summary of sorts of my impressions in the meantime. First law, and also I'm not going to recap what it's about because it's one of the most popular series in contemporary fantasy, so that's that. For me, the series relied way too heavily on subversion for its own sake. That's how I read it, interpreted it. Make of that what you will, obviously. The Blade itself, book 1, essentially functions as the Fellowship of the Ring, but grimdark, I guess, because honestly it wasn't even that dark. And it felt too obvious to me past a certain point. Like it was laid on a little too thickly. I didn't particularly vibe with that. I didn't loathe it, but I was kind of like, yikes. The ending of Before They Are Hanged, book 2, also kind of felt like, sorry, not sorry. D&D, as in, D.B. Weiss and David Benioff, those guys could have pulled it out of their backsides. Just a smidge. And it felt like the ending of Last Argument of Kings, book 3, was screaming the following at me. Guys! Look at me! I'm a fancy loop of nihilistic randomness! Get it? Yeah, I got it, mate. Shut the fuck up. Sorry. But to be clear, this feeling applied to the book's plots in general, not just the ending. It's just very easy to point out with the endings. And all of this felt rather unpolished to me. Immature even, though immature in the sense of not having completed its maturation process. Not in the sense of, this is for edgy teens, although you be the judge of that. And additionally, honestly, as a series first law has that kind of ending, I would normally hate, like just really, but given how thoroughly uninvested I was in its story such as it was and characters, I simply yawned and felt relieved I could finally move on to something else. The pacing for its part wasn't particularly good either, but that's also because there was very little actual plot in these books. They were also too long, sorry, not sorry. Prose-wise, I really don't have anything specific to say. It was fine, functional, whatever, moving on. I enjoyed Stephen Pacey's narration in terms of tone and personality, but I took huge issue with the fact he used different accents within groups of people who should have had the same one. Very specifically that. Because this made the already subpar world building, sorry, not sorry, even worse as a result. It nuked extra hard any hope I had of getting an actual proper sense of setting, culture, etc., just world-building texture out of these books. And I haven't seen anyone say anything about this because the majority opinion seems to be First Law is awesome and Stephen Pacey's narration is awesome without any caveats, but that was my experience. Then there's the character work. First Law is sold on the merit of its character work. And honestly, once again, sorry, not sorry, but I don't get it. Because First Law's character work isn't that good. It's not bad. I would even say it's good, it's just not that good. And A Song of Ice and Fire does it way better, fight me. And actually started, you know what, I'd go so far as to say there were holes in character motivation and character building. Take Logan's berserkerism. That whole thing where he goes Super Saiyan, I must kill everyone. What was that exactly? A curse? Demonic possession? Mental illness of some sort? A contrived metaphor for the violence in the heart of every man herder? No, a story doesn't have to delve that deeply into every single aspect of a character's psyche, although that's a pretty big freaking facet of Logan as a character, so... But then don't pretend it has the best, deepest character work ever. You know what I mean? I mean, you can, obviously, this is all subjective, and I'll simply agree to disagree, but no, for me, the character work in First Law wasn't amazing. Again, it was good. It wasn't that good. Now to get into a teensy bit more detail. Yes, sure, there was some character development with Logan and Giselle in book 2. Funny anecdote, at first, I thought Giselle's name was Giselle, because that's how I heard it at first. Anyway, I kind of like Baez in book 1. He's like a subverted Gandalf. Haha. But then I didn't care about anyone by the time I got to book 3, so big whelp. Pharaoh, for her part, was... ugh. Just nah. Let's not even go there. Once again, fight me. I kind of like Glocta. Okay. And I kept kind of liking him. He's like a less well-done Tyrion Lannister type figure. Again, sorry, not sorry. And I kind of liked his and Ardy's relationship. Ardy, best secondary character, just no question. I actually enjoyed her. Fine, I'll give the books that. So I kind of liked their relationship. Weirdly enough, I suppose. Glocta overall was basically the most interesting character to me. So again, that's not ultimately saying much, but anywho. And I found his friendship, natural friendship, yes, and then not really romance, more of a marriage of convenience, kind of. I found that passively convincing and, well, maybe not emotionally satisfying, no, but I would say tonally satisfying, so yippee. But at the risk of sounding like a broken record, but so be it, I am not a character-driven reader, especially not in speculative literature. That is, in fact, the primary reason I'd originally decided not to read First Law. I didn't have any, preconceived negative biases against it. I was like, oh, everyone talks about this as being rather plotless, no real world building, it's all about the characters, I probably wouldn't like this. But then my ex told me, well, yeah, but I still think you could find something interesting in terms of world building and theming in these books, and I really enjoyed the audiobooks, and you should give them a go too. Well, that was a fat fucking lie, because the world building was garbage. Plain and simple. And that's that. Like, not offensive. Nothing felt offensive to me. It was just tasteless, bland Fantasylandia stuff. Like, there's a country named England. Come on. And even my boyfriend pointed out to me when I told this to him, Gurkish sounds like Turkish. I mean, come on. There just wasn't anything of substance there. So here's my very sincere advice. Do not, I repeat, do not pick this series up if good, engaging, or interesting world building, and theming, give me a second, is essential to your enjoyment of fantasy. I mean, I do not understand the hype for these books in any case, regardless of personal preferences, but on a personal preferences front, they were never going to work that well for me in any case. So if you're not character-driven reader, don't bother with these, it's not worth it. And as to theming, well, I got nothing. Nada, zilch, diddly squat, beyond the most basic box standard. Baby's first steps into the nihilistic, edgy adjacent message that life is meaninglessly random, randomly violent, and violently meaningless. And even then, it was a fairly milquetoast version of that, quite frankly. I guess, technically, there was also a very basic bitch, power corrupts motif, if you can even call it that. But putting aside the fact I'm not personally into nihilism, I find this kind of stuff, no offense, unremittingly boring and uninspired to boot. That being said, if you're in the mood for entertainment-driven fantasy and you're a character-driven reader, once again, this lack of theming and deeper world-building won't be a problem. More power to you there. Finally, because, again, everyone talks about this, and it's like, oh, First Law is so freaking funny, and it's such good dry British humor. I'm sorry, I love me some good British humor. Are we talking about the same thing? Because I love me some Blackadder, some Fawlty Towers, some Monty Python, but I didn't find First Law particularly funny, honestly. Sure, I had a good laugh towards the end of book 1 when there occurred an absurdly, for lack of a better word, manga-esque escalation of violence. A person was splattered on the walls by a very angry naked man. Haha. But that's about it in terms of humor. So no, I don't think First Law is trash. or offensively bad. I didn't hate this series. It's just, in my subjective opinion, incredibly mediocre. And the sum of it, which I would give a weak 6 out of 10, it was just about worth reading once. Although it really is an edge case there. The sum of it was definitely lesser than its constituent parts for me. Hashtag sad life. Once again, I do not even remotely get the hype for this one. I'm legitimately confused by this one. Like I said, there are series, I hated them, or I hate a book, and I'm like, okay, I can kind of get why someone would vibe with this. And here, it's not that I don't understand how people could like these books. It's the loving that I'm like, really? But why though? But, you know, as always, to each their own. And finally, after that, ultimately, yes, disappointing serving of undercooked toast, I read China Miéville's Looking for Jake and Other Stories. Like 3 Moments of an Explosion and Other Stories, this older collection brings together a selection of short stories. Unlike the former, however, Looking for Jake felt tighter in gyroscope. By that, I mean that almost all of the stories in this collection fall under what I'll call the genre ages of weird urban fantasy specifically, or, weird urban fiction period at the very least. Most of them specifically take place in London as well, though one story actually takes place in New Crone. And yeah, it was kind of fun to be taken back there for a spell, so yay. Now, I didn't really mind this tighter scope. This collection is shorter than 3 Moments of an Explosion after all, but it is also true Looking for Jake had less conceptual variety than its more recently published sibling. The stories resemble each other a lot more than they do in 3 Moments of an Explosion, that's what I mean. Still, overall, I'd say both collections display similar levels of depth with world building and theming in their stories, although I'm not entirely settled when it comes to theming, actually. Maybe I would, in fact, give a slight edge to Looking for Jake over 3 Moments for theming specifically, but that could also simply be because the former, was shorter, and again, tighter than the latter. And because I was kind of looking a little more actively for theming in this one as well, since I'd felt a certain lack of it in 3 Moments of an Explosion. So make of that what you will, as always. In any case, oh my god, it felt so good to read. Like actual, give me that good shit levels of literary enjoyment. Freaking finally! Which means there is yet hope I will turn this reading year around. Mark my words. Especially if nothing else, because I have more China Miéville planned in the near future. And other books which I should logically enjoy. And have, like, more Ursula Guin in the non-fiction department, so yay, exciting things ahead of me. And that concludes my reading wrap-up for the month of March, during which I finally tentatively moved on to better literary pastures. Let's just hope it continues that way. I'm going to cross every part of my body. So I hope you all had a positive month of March, reading-wise and everything else-wise, and on that final note, I hope you all have a lovely day, evening, or whichever time of day you prefer. As always, do take good care of yourselves. Thank you for the continued support, and I shall see you all, hopefully, reasonably soon, in the next video. But until then, bye-bye. And also, I forgot to add, but I got this gorgeous special edition, or I mean fancy hardback edition of Perdido Street Station from the Broken Binding, and yes, I love it, and yes, I hope more of China Miéville's novels will be published in special edition formats in the future, but it's your pretty dog.